Mark Cox Show. Follow Mark on Twitter at MarkCox971.
I want young Palestinian children to be educated like our children for peace. But they're not educated for peace. The Palestinian Authority educates them to lionize terrorists and to murder Israelis. My vision is that Israelis and Palestinians both have a future of mutual recognition, of dignity, mutual respect, coexistence. But the Palestinian Authority tells them that they will never accept and should never accept the existence of a Jewish state. So I ask you, how can you make peace with someone who rejects your very existence?
It's a great question from the Prime Minister of Israel there. Kevin Howard, my guest now from Christian Friends of Israel. We were just talking about that in the break, that these children are in the Palestinian side are educated from an early age and ask questions like, what are you going to do when you see a Jew?
Exactly. They're taught, when I see a Jew, my job is to kill them and stab them or shoot them or whatever I can do. If I come up to a tree and a tree is hiding the Jew, then I ask the tree to reveal the Jew so that I can be rid of him.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and a lot of the UNRWA schools, I talked with my good friend David Badine, who does a lot of work with the UNRWA schools, which are the refugee UN schools. And textbooks are being put out with no Israel on the map. It doesn't exist. So when you're flipping through the maps of the world, it's not on there. So it's a total denial of their existence. It's a total denial of their right to exist. And it's what has led to a lot of the delegitimization campaign over the last few years.
And it's what makes me agree with Prime Minister Netanyahu. How can there be peace if you're dealing with a group of people who deny your existence or don't believe you have a right to exist? I've drawn this parallel several times, but I couldn't imagine if we had a neighbor, if Canada happened to be the Palestinian organization like Israel has living next to it, and they were occasionally lobbing bombs and threatening to annihilate the United States all the time. We would have the most militarized border. We'd have a wall with Canada.
Exactly.
And we'd have it staffed with the military, and we'd be ready to react at a moment's notice. And yet we want to criticize the Israelis for doing the exact same thing. I mean, it's about survival in so many ways. Kevin and I were also talking about the difference in the definition of democracy between what we think of. Because yesterday, John Kerry said fairly dramatically, find me this bite, cut number 13, Liz. This is the one that just blew me away. Let's play cut number 13.
But here is a fundamental reality. If the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both.
I see the smile on your face when you hear the guy say this. It's like he doesn't operate in the same reality as the rest of the world. But there's a big difference in the Middle East among some groups in how they perceive democracy versus the U.S.
Yes, there is. And it's prevalent amongst countries who are predominantly dealing with the Muslim faith, because a lot of the core issues of Western democracy, things that we have that we take for granted sometimes as our freedoms, a lot of those freedoms run contrary to their religious beliefs in the Quran. You know, we have a freedom of speech, we have a freedom of assembly, we have freedom for women, we have freedom of religion, we have freedom from religion. These kind of freedoms contradict the beliefs of that kind of a system. So, you know, a woman, for instance, in most Muslim countries is not considered to be free. She doesn't usually have the right to buy property. Some of them don't drive in some Muslim countries. It just depends on where they're at. Yet a Muslim woman who is an Israeli citizen in the state of Israel has the right to wear her hijab or not wear her hijab. She can practice her religion or not practice her religion. She can drive a car. She can buy property. And so this understanding of, wow, we had a free election, we elected a president or we elected a leader, people think, wow, we got democracy now. But it's not true, because there's so much more packaged in that cake, if you will, of democracy and freedom.
Yeah, it's a good point. Let me bring Laura onto the line here. Laura used to be a West Bank resident. I thought it'd be interesting to have a conversation with her. Laura, you're on the radio with Kevin Howard and Mark Cox.
Yes, actually, I am an American. I've lived in the West Bank.
Okay. You lived there recently.
Yes, I've been there recently over many, many months.
So
2016.
What's your experience then living in these settlement areas? I mean, it's not necessarily easy to live in some of these areas, is it?
No, it's not. And actually, the word settlement probably, that really comes from a different term. These are really Jewish communities. They've got their own shuls, like a church. They have their own stores. They have their playground areas. They've got their everything they need right there, plus the fire department. They've got medical, and it's all got to be boarded up. Everything has to be walled up. Everything has to be fenced up. They have security gates going in and out. They cannot expand their homes. They cannot expand their like little village, you might call, or whatever. They've been there for years and years and years. They're not anything that just recently popped up. Actually, the people that live there have bought their land and have a deed from Israel, from the government. Now you've got other areas throughout the West Bank that are the people that have recently been moving in. They call those also settlements. I see Mercedes-Benz driving into these complexes all the time. There's a lot of Area 1s and Area A and Area B. Area A, you cannot drive in there. If something happens in Area A and you go in Area A and you're not a Palestinian, you might call it, and again, the Palestinian word shouldn't even be used. That was originally Greek, and it's only been given recently through media of a description back with the British mandate. So really that word, there are no Palestinians. So a lot of these are Jordanians probably.
Yeah.
And
let me get Kevin's thoughts on this settlement issue. But I mean, these are communities. But I guess my question is, having never lived there, why would you want to subject yourself to that? Why, is it cheaper? Is it an economic issue why people would want to move out to some of these?
Well, no, I don't think it's an economic issue. I think it's just an issue of difference between moving out in the country, out into the open space, or being in a metropolitan area.
Okay.
But Laura brings up a good point. These are communities. These are places where families live. They educate their children. They have school systems. They have all of the regular things that every town or village or city would have. She brought up an important point that these communities have to be fully walled and gated communities. Most of them have armed security at the entrance in and out because of the fact that they are under attack because they're in the areas which are the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria. That's the original names of the part of the Israel that this is. This is Judea and Samaria. The term West Bank was a political term given later on in the 20th century. But what's funny is when you go to the next village, if it's an Arab village, you won't find gates, you won't find walls. You can drive right in because while the Jews in their cities and villages have to worry about security issues and people coming in trying to kill them, the Jews are not running across to the Arab villages trying to bomb their houses or kill them or knife them or shoot them. It's just a strange paradigm because the security issue is one way.
Laura, was it a shock to the system when you first experienced this?
It was absolutely a shock. I was surprised. I could see well-organized Jewish communities. They do have security. They have huge, big gates. You're not getting in unless the security guard lets you in. They have double fences with barbed wire that are like 20 feet tall. They are always on guard. They have the IDF that comes in often, eats there, patrols there, stays there quite a bit. To just drive through Samaria and Judea, because I'm not going to call it the West Bank, to drive through there is windy roads like you were out in the country. A lot of people want to live out there because you have a yard. You have a house with a yard. Where in Jerusalem, you live in very tight areas like apartments. And so you're not going to find a home with a yard in Jerusalem, for an example. So people did want to live out. It would be like in our area in Missouri, it's like moving out into the country. Yeah. And you want to live out and have space. And that's what happened. And so they decided that they would live together. And so these communities have been around for a long, long, long time. And then you have the so-called Arabs, I'll call them Arabs because they're not Palestinians, you would say, that are doing what your guest said. They're just planting down a piece of some wood. They're building up now with concrete, but the others have been just kind of makeshifting some place to live. And then they build up very nice places. They spread out all over. They can come right up to the Jewish settlement, or not the settlement, the Jewish communities. But the Jewish communities cannot build out. As a matter of fact, the place I stayed in is very dangerous to drive through. Right now, there's a lot of shootings all of a sudden. People are being shot at, huge big stones being thrown at the cars. You have to wind through these roads and go very fast because you're driving amongst all of these places that are expanding. They do not own the land, by the way. They're just coming out and they're just building. They do not have a deed to the land. They're not buying the land. And then they're spreading out all over. So above, if you fly over, you're like, oh, my God, it's huge. Look at all the so-called Palestinian people in their community. How do you kick them out? There's so many of them. But as you're driving through at night, there's no lights. There's no water towers on the top of the roofs that show anyone's living there. You see tons of concrete trucks driving into them and building them up like crazy. But they can't do it for the Jewish communities. They're not allowed to.
Wow.
It's completely unfair. It's very unsafe. And when Haifa was firebombed on that Thursday, the community that I was staying at, and I will keep it unnamed because it's a very, very important place and a very high mountain that it's not a good place to fall into the wrong hands, was also firebombed.
Yeah.
And that was not reported as far as I know. They were firebombed to the point where they were up to like 18, 19, 20 times firebombed over 2 to 3 days. They were out there with their hoses trying to put it out because their fire trucks left to go protect another Jewish community that was also being threatened. And it was just mayhem. They were told they had to evacuate, but they were scared to evacuate because you've got the people that want to hurt you all around you.
Sure you do.
Waiting for the evacuation.
Laura,
many homes were lost.
Thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate you calling in.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I mean, we couldn't imagine. Most of us couldn't imagine living like that.
No, but she's got a good point on the villages here that dealt with the fires in November.
Right.
The typical rainy season starts in December for Israel, and it goes through to March, and then there's no more real rain for the whole rest of the year.
Right.
So we recently helped the community of Halamish, which is a Jewish community up in Samaria.
Where there were fires, right?
They were arson set. Over 2,000 fires across Israel, and a large portion were arson set.
Imagine moving from St. Louis to Wildwood and having to live in a gated compound because your neighbor might be throwing firebombs at you. It's something most of us can't imagine. Kevin Howard, stick around for a minute. I got to get to a break. I ran over that time with our conversation with Laura there. 314-969-9